welcome to the Knock Knock Episode 6 Q&A. My name is Jason B. Jones, and I'm here with my brother and our communications director, Simon Jones.
Hey, how's it going, Jason?
It's good, man. I'm glad we could connect to do this Q&A. First of all, I want to thank everyone for listening to Episode 6. We've had lots of conversations around this episode, and it seems like people are even more interested in the details of the case and how we can move things forward using these emerging forensic tools. I want to take another opportunity real quick to thank Rock Harmon for his help through this process. I was introduced to Rock back in September, and since then, really, he's been a wealth of information. As Simon, you and I get up to speed on DNA and specifically familial search.
Yeah, it's a whole lot to unpack, and neither of us really, we went into this kind of totally fresh.
Yeah.
We didn't know anything beyond the portrayal of DNA in Hollywood, really, if we're honest. So it's been quite an education for us, and we're still barely novices. But thankfully, with people like Rock, who are so willing to advocate and help people like us find answers for a cold case, we've been fortunate to have a good teacher.
Yeah. Simon, I'm just interested in your overall thoughts on Episode 6. We dig in really deep into the weeds. We've covered everything from just sort of general knowledge about Betty and Catherine, as I think you beautifully put in our last Q&A, as like this digital memorial to them. Then we jumped really deep into the case with Sergeant Bill Lott, and now we're into this uncharted territory of familial search. I'd be curious to hear your overall thoughts on Episode 6.
Yeah, it was great, like I said, to hear from Rock. Our audience hadn't really heard from him yet, and he's so knowledgeable and he's so passionate about the promise and the potential of this tool that is not being used by everyone, and it's promising, but it's frustrating at the same time.
Sure.
And I think that he explained that really well. And not only did he kind of go over the big picture of the science, but I think he also went into the how and the why. That is so important for people to understand when you look at why maybe this state has it and that state doesn't, or this case was able to be cracked, but these cases can't be cracked because the tools aren't there. They're not accessible. And I think so much we hear about DNA and it's this magic bullet.
Right.
And if you have it, then you can get a conviction. And it's so much more complicated than that. And I think that Rock explains that. And then once you realize that it's out there, then you start to unpack maybe the politics that so often get involved with why it can't be used and who is preventing or what is preventing people from using it.
Sure. Like I think with most things that are good, everything that's good comes with due diligence to make sure that it's used appropriately. And I think Rock has a lot of experience in seeing how this has been implemented in multiple states and knowing the right way to do it, sometimes the wrong way to do it, and the hurdles that you have to get over in order to be able to implement it. And just having him as a resource has been so helpful for us because prior to Rock's involvement, we were at a bit of a standstill for this case. Sergeant Lott is obviously researching every lead, but I would say that especially after a case this old, most of those leads have dried up. So this is really the next step in seeing what we can do for Betty and Catherine's case and a multitude of other cases as well. But this really is what we believe is the next step. It's just trying to figure out how we get there and how we get the support both of the people that are involved, but our listeners and the state of Mississippi, et cetera. Well, one of the topics that we've been discussing internally, Simon, you and I have discussed, and really pushed emerging DNA tools into this national spotlight has been the recent break in the Golden State Killer case. Just FYI, there are a lot of great podcasts out there if you're interested in digging into the Golden State Killer case specifically. Case File, which is a great show, did a 5-part series on it, and Criminology, their entire second season is dedicated specifically to this case. What really interested us, Simon, is that the Golden State Killer case, was an example of an ice-cold case that was broken wide open using DNA. And Simon, you actually touched base with Rock after episode 6 to talk specifically about this case.
Yeah, Rock has been just so gracious with his time. I spoke with him recently to get his thoughts on the Golden State Killer developments and how the methods that were used could potentially relate to Betty and Catherine's case.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who may not be familiar, here's a quick summary of what we're talking about. So on April 24th, 2018, Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, they arrested 72-year-old Joseph James DeAngelo. He was charged with several counts of first-degree murder in the Golden State Killer case. Police found this suspect after the killer's DNA was taken from a rape kit, which was then uploaded to a consumer genetics website. This yielded results that included a dozen or more distant relatives of the killer. This helped investigators map out DeAngelo's family tree and locate Joseph, who happened to match their profile. Police then verified Joseph's DNA in secret, gathering samples from a car door handle and his trash that he left outside of his house. The arrest was made only 4 months after the DNA profile was matched online. Here's what Rock shared with us recently in our phone interview.
Okay, now we need to distinguish. We now have with the Golden State Killer's stunning success, 2 totally separate tracks for trying to solve these cases. Familial searching, which relies on the state-run, state-controlled offender database, looking for a close relative of the person who committed the crime. And then forensic genealogy or genetic genealogy, nobody's really settled on what we're going to call it now, which essentially uses the evidence, conducts additional typing, then relies on these ancestry type databases or where people have taken their ancestry DNA profile and loaded it onto this other database called GEDmatch that people use to search for relatives. The reason they're parallel tracks, nobody really knows which one's going to succeed if either of them succeeds. In order to do familial searching, the state has to agree to do it. In order to do the forensic genealogy or genetic genealogy, the police have to be willing to spend a few $1,000s to retype the evidence, create a family tree, and then have an experienced person sort through the family tree looking for the person who committed the crime. So there are two, one requires the state to go along with it. The other, if you have enough additional evidence to retype, just requires the police to want to do it. So there's really no excuse, if there's enough evidence, for the police not trying the genealogy. For familial searching, the sad reality is the majority of states don't want to do it or even don't even want to talk about doing it. And that's the obstacle, and it's a huge obstacle in those states.
Let's take a quick break. While living in Ethiopia, some friends of mine witnessed firsthand the consequences of extreme poverty. They saw how Ethiopian women, in an effort to provide for themselves and their families, were forced to make unthinkable choices just to survive. these friends realized they wanted to give these women another choice, one that would provide them the opportunity to earn a living. It was from this experience that Fashionable was born. This movement started with a collection of hand-woven scarves, of which my wife has many, and has grown to include handmade leather bags and jewelry, apparel, shoes, and most recently, a premium denim line, lovingly crafted by women who have overcome extraordinary circumstances. We're so honored to partner with Fashionable and offer our listeners 15% off their first order. Go to livefashionable.com and use the discount code KNOCK15 at checkout. Again, visit livefashionable.com today to help bring opportunity and choice to these amazing women.
Let's jump into some questions from the Knock Knock community.
Hi, my name's Joseph. I live in Nashville. I love what you guys are doing with the podcast. I'm a little confused still on the familial DNA. Specifically, what does a familial search do that regular DNA search doesn't find? Like, where do you start with a familial search, and how deep into a family does it get? Like, does it go to specific members of a family, or how far into the tree does it spread? If you could give a quick overview on the whole process of a familial search again, it'd be really helpful for me, and I'm sure a lot of other people. Really love what you guys are doing. Thanks so much.
That's a really good question, and it's a really fair question because we've been spending a lot of time really digging into the differences, but I imagine for a lot of listeners, it's brand new, and it can be really confusing. Simon, I think you just mentioned even earlier that it's a complicated idea and a complicated tool to try to distill into a really short description. I think that the best way that I can describe it is, and Simon, I want you to dig in to help with this, is with a DNA strand that they pull from a crime scene. It's like a serial number or a social security number or a unique code. And pretty much what they can do legally is that they can take that code of numbers and then they can go to a database that they have access to. I think it's a state database that they have access to. And they can say, does this unique code match anything 100% in this database that we have? That's how DNA works today in the state of Mississippi. The way that familial search would work is out of that code, of however many numbers, what they're able to do is to take portions of that code and compare those portions of that code to this database. And this database is comprised of people who have already either been there are some that they've taken DNA because they've been a suspect or been arrested, and then it's convicted felons as well. And then they'll take a portion of that code and search it against that in order to get a lead on a familial tie. Now, what they cannot do is they cannot convict based on a portion, a match of a portion of DNA. What it does is it allows them then to go do the due diligence of getting a pure sample from that suspect and then going back to the original way that they do DNA and comparing, does this sample 100% match this that we got from the crime scene? And based on that 100% match, that's where you get the conviction. Simon, that's how I understand it. And I know there's some parameters on what that familial search, those portions that they can search against, how they actually do that, and who what are those family ties?
Yeah, there's a really great resource on our website that I'm going to kind of quote from or paraphrase. If you go to our website and you go to the episode 6 page, you'll find a document, a PDF that Rock shared with us called Familial DNA Searching Current Approaches. This is from 2015. And in there's a summary of familial search that I thought was really great. And it says familial search is a process used to attempt to identify a close relative, such as parent, child, or sibling, of the true source of a crime scene sample when an initial search at the local DNA, state DNA, or national DNA index system fails to provide a direct match. The scientific basis of familial search is that biologically related persons generally will share more variants of a given gene than unrelated individuals. So what that means is that they're going to, instead of a needle in a haystack, it's reducing the haystack to a handful of hay. And it's saying, okay, this group of people have more in common genetically than they don't. And now, how can we zero in on as Rock said in the episode, a father, a mother, a child, full sibling, and once we locate that, then we're going to the police will use their investigative expertise to narrow it down, right? To narrow down the pool of suspects and then find someone, as they did in the Golden State Killer, that matches their existing profile. Like, we know this is a male. We know they had to have been around this area, that type of profile. I also want to note that this is not a new idea. This is not some breakthrough 2018 technology. It's worth noting that the UK has been using this for years and has a database of millions of people. So when they need to do a familial search, they oftentimes are able to get the information that they need and get a suspect rather than waiting decades and decades.
Yeah. And it, just like with anything new, not necessarily new from a technology perspective, but new to the way that things have been done, there's due process that has to happen in order to make sure that none of these things are abused or used incorrectly or inappropriately. And so, there are states that Rock covered, specifically the one that we talked a lot about was California, and California made the right process around doing it in a way that the constituents of California and law enforcement were comfortable with this tool to be used towards finding justice for these cases. And that's ultimately what Mississippi needs to do. But what I want to make clear is that it's not just familial search that helps to convict a suspect. It is that direct 100% DNA match that has to be done after familial search provides the lead that will lead towards the conviction of that particular suspect.
And that's where the investigation comes in, and these talented, experienced investigators, detectives, will go in and often acquire their suspect's DNA in secret, as they did with Golden State Killer, so that they know, proof positive, this is a 100% or 99.999% match to the killer's DNA. They're not going to just start arresting an entire family,
right?
But it does give them a direction. It does tell them who to talk to and gives them a much smaller circle to work with, rather than, it could be any one of 100,000 people.
I hope that makes it clear. And thank you so much for calling that in. And we will continue to explain this as often as we can, because it is a complicated situation that Simon put really well. We are almost a novice in. We're certainly not experts, but that's why we have people like Sergeant Lott and Rock who are experts in this particular field. So thank you so much for your question.
Hey guys, this is Amy. I just have a few questions about familial search and what do the citizens of Mississippi need to do to get familial search passed? Is there a petition that can be signed or letters that can be written? Who do we send those letters to? How does a person get started in trying to advocate for this? I'm really enjoying the podcast. This is the first one I've ever listened to. I have lived in Starkville my whole life, so I remember this case. And I'm just really proud that you guys are doing this, and I'm excited about hearing more. Thanks. Bye.
Amy, thank you so much for calling in. And wow, you've just the fact that you lived in Starkville your whole life and are listening to this, it's just really special to us to know that there are people that are listening and appreciating us getting the story back out there. You bring up so many good questions that are pretty much the outline and basis of our next episode of how we're going to really move this forward with the help of a lot of people and all of our listeners. Just to go through some of your questions about what the citizens need to do to get familial search passed. You know, one of the things that Rock said in the episode is that there needs to be a particular case that helps drive a reason for this to be implemented. It's not so much. I mean, I imagine law enforcement and the crime lab is overextended and may not have the resources they need to do everything that they can do. And so when you approach adding something new to their plate, even if it's the right thing, that can oftentimes be met with resistance. I mean, just think about your job. Simon, you can relate to this. If someone walked up to you and said, hey, we still need you to do everything that you're currently doing, but we also need to add this other thing that we need you to do as well. Even if you know that that's the right thing to do and that it's for the greater good and it'll benefit the company and et cetera, part of you is like, well, gosh, I'm already crazy busy. You're just adding more to my plate. So I would say that there is anytime something new is introduced into the way that law enforcement does their job, it's not that it's met with just resistance for resistance sake. I think that there's a lot of details and nuance that goes into play. And so what we think that this is a unique opportunity for is that this is a case of someone, a couple of people who were very beloved in the community. This is a case that has gotten a lot of media coverage over the years. Our hope is that it gets more media coverage in the coming weeks and months. And what that will do is it will bring the topic of familial search up to the surface in order for the people that can make those decisions to take notice again. One of the things that we'll talk about in episode 7 is this idea of gathering all of you who are listening to whatever this looks like, sign a petition or reach out to the right people in order to be able to move this forward, and not in a way of not appreciating what they're already doing, but really advocating for this. And so we'll talk a lot about that in episode 7 and give you specific tools in order to be able to do that. Simon, what do you think just about what people can do in order to be able to continue to help us move this case along? Yeah,
it's really about more than, as Rock explained, more than necessarily getting a bill, getting a piece of legislation in. That is one way that it could be done, but other states have done this without legislation. And it's really at the state level of law enforcement where you have buy-in from the prosecutors, you have buy-in from the crime lab, and you also have, frankly, the money to do it. No one at any point has said this is free. But much as we look at the history of crime, the intersection of crime and science, there are some junk sciences, as I'm sure everyone's heard of, that have been less than reliable or have yielded not so great accuracy. We do not believe this is one of those junk sciences. And so it's really about getting the people that make these decisions to say, okay, this is a tool that we will start using. This is something we will invest in. And without that, I feel like we'll see more of the status quo.
Right.
And sadly, that may not yield results for cold cases such as this.
Specifically, just in how it can actually be implemented, this is also taken from that document that'll be up on our website. It on page 23, it talks about there's a number of features that are common to laboratories utilizing FS, which stands for familial search. And these are just a few of the things. So it's law enforcement, prosecutor commitment, Simon, which you just referenced, standard operating protocols, which means this is the way it's used and this is how it's used for specific cases. Software, which we talked a little bit about. It's just a database in order to be able to do a more narrowed down search into familial ties. Two-part process of generating a candidate list and follow up with lineage testing. And disclosure of name only after lineage testing. So it's not just a witch hunt. It really has to be defined by a match before any disclosure of a name. And then it says typically if no concordant lineage test result is obtained, then no investigative lead is reported. So it is really just making sure that there's a case that gets enough media coverage to make this a priority to both the crime lab and the Attorney General of Mississippi. Also, it's having enough people to really advocate for this, and so that's why listeners to our podcast, not because our podcast is not for us, but the more that this podcast is listened to and shared, the more people know about Betty and Catherine's story. And then it's just the crime lab implementing the right tools in the right way so that we can use this specifically for Betty and Catherine's case. Anyway, that's a long answer, but thank you so much for your question.
Hi, my name is Allison. I'm calling from Ontario, Canada. My question has to do with your last episode on familial DNA searches. My question has to do with, has there been any movement on searching public databases, 23andMe, Ancestry.com, anything of that nature? And if so, what are the legalities that are involved in actually doing a search on a public database? Because those would include members of the general public as opposed to convicted felons that would be included in CODIS or any of your state databases. So I guess my question really is just, have you looked into doing that? And what are the legal barriers to going forward? And how would you go about doing that? Anyways, that's my question. Looking forward to hearing your next Q&A session. Thank you.
Allison, again, really, really good question. And honestly, there's a lot of answers in that we don't know. But let me unpack what we do know. So in order to actually do that, we would have to have the DNA code of the suspect from Catherine's rape kit. So the issue with that is that this is an open case. So we don't have access to that. And therefore, as a private citizen, we can't go and use that DNA profile and plug it into some of these public systems. So that's number one. Number two, you talk about the legalities around this. And Simon, we were talking about this right before we record the episode. I would say that a lot of those legalities are a bit unknown. Like if we talk about the Golden State Killer case, those tools were utilized by someone in law enforcement. It wasn't a private citizen that had access to the DNA code and then used it up against their personal 23andMe account. It was someone inside that then had the foresight to try to use those tools. Now, as far as legality is concerned, I think some of that is yet to be determined.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting this was publicly available information. To the best of my knowledge, this was not something that was considered private, that was behind some kind of membership private type of thing. This was, again, to the best of my knowledge, as I understand it, this was information that anyone could have found online. That was part of a public database of some kind. The investigators, I don't believe, made it public what service they used or what website they used. They just, I think they kind of kept it vague on purpose to say that it was publicly available in a database. So it was I think there was some luck involved because someone related to the killer happened to have their DNA profile on there. And it does beg the question, could that prove true of Betty and Catherine's case? Quite possibly it could. Just as well, it could not. And the killer's relatives could not have their DNA publicly available on the internet. But it's definitely, I think, worth a try.
Yeah, it is just really, I think the best next step is to obviously use the official means to explore the CODIS database via law enforcement. If that doesn't work, well, then, yeah, I think that is a very good conversation to be had. However, I think we'll find out as this Golden State Killer case continues if there is a hiccup in that case or a hiccup in conviction because public tools were used. We don't really know. But I think that's a very good question. And I would say that most people's understanding of DNA, it revolves around these public services that are marketed to help you understand where your family was originally from or any particular health issues that you may have down the road based on your DNA profile. So those are all very good things, but we really don't know how that could in the future apply to this case. We're all just very hopeful that the means of familial search through law enforcement against the CODIS database will be the next step towards using these emerging tools in order to be able to make a break in Betty and Catherine's case. Thank you so much for your question. I think that's a question that we will continue to talk about and discover more information about as we go along.
Let's take another quick break.
If there's one thing I've learned about Betty through this process, it's that her life was dedicated to giving back. I know she would have loved organizations like Thistle Farms. At first glance, Thistle Farms is a world-class provider of natural home and body products. In the summer, their bug spray is a must. But what is truly amazing about these items are the people who make them. All of Thistle Farms' products are lovingly crafted by women, survivors of trafficking, prostitution, and addiction. You see, beneath the surface, what Thistle Farms really is a place that provides safe housing, economic independence, and a strong community of advocates for these women. Take a minute to visit thistlefarms.org and learn more about this amazing organization. And while you're there, use the discount code KNOCK15 for 15% off your first order. That's thistlefarms.org, where love is the most powerful force for change in the world.
Before we go, I just want to share some quick updates about Knock Knock. We are working on a few different exciting things that are going to be coming up. First, we are in the works to do a live Q&A episode coming up here after our next episode, so that will be really cool. There's also talks going on right now with major media outlets, so there's going to be more updates to come on that. And for our next episode, episode 7, where we've got some new relationships that we've been working on that we are so excited to share with you. So tune in for the next episode to hear more about that.
Yeah, we'll have a lot more details around those things. I think one of the things we're really excited about, we're hoping that we'll have Sergeant Bill Lott there with us to be able to answer some of those questions that you might have specifically around the case. Yeah, it's going to be really good. There's a lot of cool things coming up, so stay tuned. Simon, just remind our listeners how they can continue to connect with us and to these things that are coming up and what we're doing.
Yeah, of course. So there's the Knock Knock Facebook group. If you're on Facebook, you can request to join our group on Facebook. The easiest way to get there is to go to our website, knockknockpodcast.com. And on there at the top, you'll see a link that says discussions. And if you click on that, it will give you a link to our Facebook group. So as long as you're logged into Facebook, it'll take you right to the page. You can request to join, and of course, we'll accept you in. And there you can connect with other listeners, and you can post questions or leave comments. We also have our voicemail. That's at 1-888-57-BETTY. You can call in anytime and leave us a voicemail with your questions or thoughts. And we also have a contact form on our website. So if you just go to knockknockpodcast.com, scroll down, and there's a form there that you can fill out to send us a message.
To join the Knock Knock community, be sure and connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Knock Knock Pod. There you can ask questions, leave comments, or just say hi. We've also set up a voicemail at 1-888-57-BETTY. If you have comments or questions, or you'd like to be a part of the show, please call and leave us a message. You can also rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you download podcasts. Reviews are key to keeping Knock Knock on the charts where people can find our show. Knock Knock is produced by Chris Cerrone and me. Special thanks to the Knock Knock team, Lacey Orcioli, Rebecca Jones, Jason Adams, Simon Jones, Cole Flynn, Colleen Jones, and Maggie Thomas. We'll be back soon with our next full episode, so please share the podcast with your friends and family. Thanks again for subscribing to the Knock Knock Podcast.